we're back at it. This time I'm in the hot seat. And in some ways, this is kind of the mirror image of what, so I was just reflecting on what you said. And in many ways, it's they're contact points, right? But it's the other side of the experience. And I think this story is the uglier side of racism in many ways. But let me just jump into it. So I had a very liberal upbringing, actually. So around the dinner table, I wasn't being indoctrinated with Diswat Khafar. It was quite the opposite. It was my father especially would be openly critical of the system, and I think if Special Branch knew about some of those family conversations, they may have visited us. But also, like I remember dinner parties, socially, would often break up or end on a kind of a tense note because of my dad's politics. So when he gathered with his friends, there were often arguments and tense conversations. And I think he was more open. I don't want to speak for him, but my sense as a young boy growing up, and my experience is kind of, I think, 10 years prior to yours, 10 years or so. I think some of it came from a place of working on the mines. So he was an HR director on the mines, which meant that there would be seasonal kind of annual wage negotiations. And so he was sitting opposite very formidable guys, guys who are senior in politics now. Our president, Gwede Mantashe, who we must remember in our prayers because he's currently not well. But those sorts of guys. And I think it's, as you said, it's interacting with a human being versus the propaganda, right? And so the kind of the fairy tale of supremacy dissolves when you are confronted by here's a human being and he's formidable, and he breaks all the molds. So how do I do how do I reconcile these two realities? Because on the one hand, I'm being told this and this story, and on the other hand, I'm dealing with guys and they don't fit that mold at all. And I think that influenced him a lot. So he just didn't buy it. And I think another influence on him and through the generational chain on me was my gran. So my gran was a wonderful Christian lady. She just loved the Lord. So quick shout out to all the gogos there. Keep going, ladies. You have an influence that you don't even see just through quiet prayers and gospel conversations and your example. So we love you, gogos. Keep going. So my gogo was amazing in that way. She was a widow. She raised 4 kids on her own. She was a nurse. And then she was the matron of a hostel. And I think her faith, and primarily her faith, but also just that profession, nursing, it draws more empathetic types, but also I think it teaches you empathy. It teaches you to relate to human beings as human beings, not as members of a group. So I remember she was totally in her thinking, not colored by the prevailing system. And she would openly, just gently challenge. She's not like a political person, an activist or anything, but would constantly push against it quite easily. I remember one story where she was sitting with my sister, and so this must be early 90s, and they're looking at what must have been the U magazine. I can only think it was the new U magazine, centerfold, and it's got all the Miss South Africa candidates there. So there's like 10 ladies. And my gran says to my sister, so which one do you like? And my sister points, to the standard Barbie, blonde hair, blue eyes. And my gran says, no, I like this one. And it's the only woman of color, and I think she's trying to model something for my sister in that moment. And she's doing it way before it was cool for white people to say black is beautiful, right? I mean, There's no, you're not winning any street cred in the early 90s for holding that sort of view. So she was a great influence on us, and I think a great influence on my dad as well. And then just to describe this kind of environment, so my sister, there's the fruits of my dad's influence and my grand's influence. My sister, I think I must have been 10, so she was probably 12. She writes a letter to Die Groot Krokodil, to Pierre Weah himself, and she says he must dismantle apartheid. We still got the letter somewhere. He must take apartheid away because it's messing up her friendships.
Wow.
Yeah, and we got a response from the office of the president. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Promising us. Say again?
Why haven't you framed those letters?
No, we must. They're somewhere. They're still lying in some box in somebody's garage. And he responds, and he if I remember correctly, he promises some sort of change.
Yeah.
So who knows? It doesn't sound like the crocodile, but that's what the letter said, and it came from the office of the president. So from a young age, my sister was very conscious that this was also this is not a good and right thing. Now, I don't say any of that to kind of put a feather in my cap. In fact, it's quite the opposite. In spite of all of that, that kind of growing up with that positive influence, I still, if I look at my own experience, I can still see the seeds of racism in my own heart. And I can still see how that was nurtured by the propaganda, by everything that was coming at us from both just at a social, informal level, but also through public media and so on. So just a few stories to kind of bear that out. I remember, like, young guy, we had a veld behind our house, and there's a Mercedes-Benz that always used to park there in that veld, an old Merc. And MacGyver was big in those days. So people of my vintage know who MacGyver is.
That was my nickname growing up, by the way. One of my nicknames.
Louis MacGyver.
Yeah, my grandfather called me that because I every little corner of something that I could find. So
yeah, I mean, he was a hero. Let's just take a moment to acknowledge him, because that guy could take a piece of chewing gum and a paper clip and turn it into a helicopter. Yeah, I mean, that's who he was, right? So obviously, you and I, in our various contexts, we're running around MacGyvering all over the place.
Yeah.
And one of my MacGyver adventures was to go. I took a wire coat hanger, and I was going to break into this Merc, and then I was going to hotwire it, right? So there I am, and I'm shoving my wire coat hanger down the side of this guy's prize automobile, and I'm there, and the next thing is this hand on my arm. Yeah. And it's not a white hand, right? And I promise you, I didn't touch the ground on the way home. It's 500 meters. I just straight into my bedroom like in a flash, right? And I stayed there for 3 days. Now, why? Because this person was obviously, it's like you said, right? So the people who came to the suburbs, to the burbs, were servants, right? So they were domestic helpers or they were gardeners. And so this guy, who I didn't know from the neighborhood, he must be from a place called Township. This is what I saw on the news, right? So black people lived in a place called Township, and they were angry, and they were burning stuff, and they were dangerous, and they were labeled with the word terrorist, right? So in my mind, this guy must have been a terrorist, and he was going to kidnap me. That's the level of fear. And so here's a man who's trying to protect his property. In reality, here's a young boy who's relating to him as terrorist, right? Who's going to do bad things to me simply because he's black. Yeah. That's how my mind processed that incident.
Sorry, crazy how the narrative just changes there, where you're the villain and suddenly you become the hero, and the guy who is the hero, I mean, you're stealing his car, suddenly becomes the villain because of the narrative that's perpetuated. Wow.
Totally, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, and that's a narrative I spun in my own head because those are the filters I've got, right? so then, just to share with my YouTube, some of your primary school friends, mine was similar to yours, except I can't remember any black kids at my school. So now I drive past that same school; it's totally integrated, which is a wonderful thing. But in my day, the only black people on that campus were the ground staff. So that's how you categorize people, right? So black people are servants, and white people, we just are. So you're not even really thinking about it, but those are your subliminal categories. And as on that topic of having servants, so we had a domestic helper. Her name was Ephisia Sempopo Mataboche, but of course we called her Betty because white people don't bother to, figure out the name. So that was the name she had. She had, so I think a lot of the ladies had been, spoke amongst themselves and said, no, we must have a name. You must have your white name,
Yeah.
She's a wonderful woman, and she really did have a major hand in raising us. It's that story. These ladies raise you, but then listen to how I treat her. So I can remember I must have been 11 or 12 years old, and I walk past the room and I see her, and she's cleaning the windows, which in our house wasn't simple because it was a second story. So it was double story, and so now you've got to reach your arm out and around the window with your newspaper and your window lean, and you've got to kind of do this for 2 hours to get the. And I come past. Now this is snot-nosed, pimple-faced, maybe 12, 13-year-old kid, and I say to her, "No, Betty, you're not doing that properly. You missed a spot. You must redo it." This is a 12-year-old kid telling a 50-something-year-old woman who should be worthy of all respect, no, she's not doing it properly. She must redo it. And she burst into tears. And in that moment, I realized, whoa, I'd crossed a line somewhere, that something wasn't quite right. And that I'd been computing things incorrectly, and that there was something wrong with the way I was thinking. As far as a 12-year-old can acknowledge. But it was a big moment for me. It's sat with me ever since. High school, very few black kids at our high school. It was more integrated than the primary school because it sort of sat on a ridge between two suburbs. So one very poor and one much more affluent suburb. And you had kids from the rough part of town. So you had kids of all demographics from the rough part of town. So white kids who are coming from tough upbringings, and then black kids as well, but not many. And I think it must have been really hard for them because, it's like, I don't think we even acknowledged that it must have been hard. And the K word was common currency in those days, right? I don't remember ever calling any of my mates out for saying it. I didn't say it often, but I can remember one instance in particular. I think I just learned to drive, and a taxi driver cut me off. And I just let rip in the car. I thank God that nobody actually heard me say that, but I felt I was entitled to say that. It was the most hateful thing I could think of in the moment. And I would have, like I said, I would have passed every test you'd given me on political correctness. I don't think ideologically I was a white supremacist, but I just felt entitled to use that word and to say the most hateful thing I could think of in the moment, So that's the reality of it. You see the hypocrisy. So even ideologically, if I believed one thing, the practice didn't always bear that out, right? The practice showed that there was something else going on at a heart level that wasn't quite right. And then in fact was deeply hurtful and harmful and not right at all. But then again, if you bounce back to how I was thinking versus how I was actually living, when Madiba came out, I thought this was a wonderful occasion. I don't think I appreciated it at the level that the average black person would have appreciated it, but I thought this was wonderful. I remember us being very happy in our household and seeing it as a momentous thing. And another incident that really touched me was for personal reasons as well was Josiah Tugwani. I don't know if you remember that name. Yeah, he won the Olympic gold in the marathon in '96, I think it was. Now here's a coal miner. I don't even think he was a coal miner. I think he was a janitor on the mines, an illiterate guy. It had special interest for me because my dad was actually commentating for the SABC, and he commentated on that race. And so I was listening to my father's voice coming from Atlanta, sitting at home, as Josiah won. And my dad told me afterwards that like he was green as an athlete. Like he didn't know what was sort of the momentous nature of the occasion. He said to the other guys on the team that like this isn't a big race. There's only like 150 athletes. What's the big fuss? I only have to beat 149 other guys. And then he did. It didn't matter that those 149 guys were the best athletes in the world. And I just remember like having, tears coming down my face when he won. It was a massive moment for us, and I felt that he had represented us so proudly. And I don't know why, but I felt that was, a victory for us as a nation. I can't really put my finger on it. Going through my 20s, I'm just living completely self-absorbed life, not really interested in what's going on around me, socially, politically, enjoying my upper middle class life. But at that time, similar to you, I get converted. I follow a girl into a Presbyterian church for all the wrong reasons, and I hear about my brokenness in that church, and I hear that the problem with the world is that it is broken, but that problem isn't only out there, it's in here, it's inside. And that for me was a revolution, because it just resonated with the truth. I knew that there was stuff wrong with me, and I've been describing some of that stuff. Everything we were hearing in our politics classes, in our economics classes, in our philosophy classes said the problem's out there with that particular group. It's this group or that group, and if we can put that group to one side, if we can marginalize this group, or we can overthrow that group, we'll solve the problem. No one ever said the problem starts at home. And that was the first time I heard that. And it woke me up to my sin. So now you encounter Jesus, you encounter him in all his purity, you start feeling your own filth, And one of the things I started to see was my own racism, and the racism around me in my culture, this rotting culture. So to keep going with the story, I spend some time traveling. I come back to South Africa, I study a bit more. I get a job in government where all my colleagues are black. In my first job, I was like the only white guy on the team. But I had a very positive experience. Everybody treated me, they didn't treat me, I guess, how I deserved to be treated, in the sense of being white and carrying all of that historical baggage. They just treated me as a person, and it was a very positive experience. At this time, the Lord's working in my heart, and I'm growing in my faith. I end up at Bible college by some miracle that I won't recount now. But again, at Bible college, we had this legendary professor there, a guy by the name of John Child, who anyone who's ever been to GWC will know about. And he took us on a deep dive into race and race issues and the gospel. And the thing that struck me, we watched Cry Freedom, which is the Steve Biko story, and other movies like that. And we read lots of articles, and we had lots of class discussions. And the thing that really struck me were the class discussions, because in those discussions, when my black brothers and sisters spoke, I heard a level of hurt that I was totally naive to. And these were younger black people. And I had kind of been operating under the assumption that we're healing, the generation who really bore the pain, they seem to be coming to terms with it, and we it was a kind of an unspoken assumption that things are really improving and it's much better now. When I heard that hurt, it was a major correction for me. I was like, wow, this thing is still with us in a massive, massive way. And I heard how deep the wounds were.
Sure.
And that was a real eye opener for me. I remember Musa Ntinga, who's our pastor at Soweto Community Church. I remember him. It is Soweto Community. That is what they've called it, I think.
I think it's Christ Central Soweto.
Christ Central Soweto. That's it. So I was a postgrad student, and he was just coming into college, but we were in fellowship group together. And I remember him just sharing. There was some horrible, like that cycle that we were talking about earlier. There was some horrible racial incident that had blown up in the media, and everybody was chasing their tails again, as we usually do. And we were just standing in the courtyard having a chat about it. And he described it to me like this. He said, it's like, in his experience, it's like you've been raped, and now you're forced to live in the same house with your rapist. That's how he described it to me. And I was just like, wow, that's really something. It just woke me up to the level of trauma that people are trying to process. And I had I was kind of operating under the assumption, no, it's getting better. It's much better than it was. And in some ways it is, but those wounds don't just disappear. You can't just ask people to get over it, which we've heard many times in our culture. And that was that just drove it home for me. It's like, this is a profound level of hurt that I'm clearly not understanding. So we finish up at Bible college, and then we move back to Midrand. Now you must understand, I've grown up in the burbs proper, right? So northern suburbs, Joburg, went to Stellenbosch University, then went to southern suburbs, Cape Town, for seminary. So I've never really lived in a properly integrated community like Midrand is. I would say Midrand, I don't know the exact statistics, but I would hazard a guess that Midrand is majority black if you just looked at the demographic breakdown. It's the first time I'm living in a neighborhood like that. So I go to Pick and Pay for the first time. And it just dawns on me, I'm the only white guy in this shop. And I feel that level of self-consciousness like that I think many black people must feel when they go into some sort of white space. I feel like eyes are just burning a hole in my back, and I feel like I'm an offense, No one even cares. I mean, people are just, getting their cheese or whatever. They're not, no one even bats an eyelid, and now it's totally normal. But I remember that first experience being a real kind of waking up to the fact that I'm a minority in this country, and that's the reality, right? But because I've always lived in the burbs, I've kind of thought of South Africa differently. So it was just having a correction as to actually what are the demographics in this country. Well, it's majority black, and you're one of very few. And it's been similar with the schools. So our kids moved from schools where they were in the vast majority, maybe one or two kids of color. Now, maybe 5 out of 25 or so are white kids, and it's a gift. So when we go away with other white families, they will often comment on our boys having an accent. They speak with an accent, and they use words that the other white kids don't, that they've picked up on the playground from all their black mates, that the other white kids don't even know what they're talking about. So, which I think is a gift to them, because that's what this country is, right? So they need to be able to interact with everybody, and everybody is not just your white mates from the burbs. That's not everybody. And it's kind of an awakening for white people to actually realize that. Just speaking about the kids, seeing the legacy of the past through their eyes, because kids are just honest, and they're not politically correct, and they just say what's on their hearts and their minds, So I remember we were driving through we were going on holiday, and we driving through the Transkei. And my daughter, she was small then, but she says, "Dad, how come all the brown-skinned people work in the fields and all the white-skinned people go on holidays?"
Yeah.
And it was just, it's a huge insight, It's a very similar conversation with my second born. We pull up at a forecourt just to fill up with petrol. And he goes, now this is years later, "Dad, how come the brown-skinned people put the petrol into the car and the white-skinned people are driving the cars?"
Yeah.
So they see that they're just seeing what's there, but we don't see it anymore. We just take it for granted. Like, I've never seen a white person at a forecourt. Maybe they're there. I'm sure they're there somewhere, but that's and that's kind of demographically skewed, right? So there should be, I don't know, what are we, maybe 20% of the population. If there had never been an apartheid, 20% of the people working at the forecourt would be white. You would see them, but they're not, right? And kids pick up on these things because they're looking at the world with fresh eyes. And many comments like that. It's been striking over the years to see our society through their eyes, because they see it afresh. They don't have all of our blind spots. We're going to do a whole episode on the church, but I've seen racism in the church. I've dealt with white racism in the church and had to interact with that. I myself have been accused of racism twice. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But, it's alive and well in the church. So we mustn't live under that illusion, like that the church is one thing and the culture is another thing. Certainly the church is better, in my view. And Christ makes all the difference in the world. But, of course, there's residual sin, right? So we can't harbor any illusions about, no, we've arrived, because we certainly haven't. And we'll take some time to really explore that theme in one of the later episodes. If I try and kind of pull all the strands together, it's going back to what we said earlier. You kind of in your own life and in the public life of this country, we kind of lurch from crisis to crisis when it comes to race issues. I look at all these incidents, just these few examples in my own life. And otherwise, you kind of, at least from my perspective, have been oblivious and not really sensitive to the fact that this is people's lived realities every single day. And it can get discouraging at times. There have been, we were talking earlier off air, so to speak, about times when I felt I should immigrate. And not out of some kind of white rant. No, the country's going to hell in a handbag because of this government, because they have messed it up. Not that at all. It's just sometimes you get the feeling like my presence is so painful to people that you wonder what good am I doing here? But I think those are weaker moments. Those are moments of discouragement. I think whenever we return to the gospel, and whenever we go back to those core truths that you were mentioning, the Imago Dei, the fact that there's sin in all of us, but Christ redeems all of us. The fact that the cross is more powerful than even apartheid was. The fact, those core truths, the fact that we're all going to be together in glory, and we're going to be laughing and crying and dancing and just rejoicing that it's all over, and that we don't have to have these sorts of conversations anymore together, black and white together. That's the Bible's crystal clear on that. Those truths, in my better moments when I'm thinking lucidly, though that is the truth, right? My discouragement is not the truth. My discouragement is an emotion that I feel, because it's a very emotive topic, and we do get discouraged from time to time. But when I reflect on the truth, and I do that in community with you, with guys on staff, with our church, our beautiful church family, when we do that together, and I see that we are one in Christ, that is the truth, right? And that's why we're having this conversation, because we want to remind people of that truth, and we want to go back to that truth, and we want to press deeper into that truth, and hold our sin in all its ugliness up to the light of that truth. Anyway, I've said enough. I think that's pretty much my story.
Yeah, bro, 2 questions from me. Just in light of everything you said, I think one, just so when you feel like you need to leave and immigrate, obviously because you feel like your presence is a reminder of people's pain, is there any temptation where you hate yourself? Do you hate your race and struggle with your whiteness in those moments? And I ask because I've seen that play itself out, where in attempts to try and be helpful, so saying, like, for example, I should leave because I think that will be helpful for people's healing. I shouldn't be around. I remind people of their scars. Then there's just an internal oppression or hatred towards oneself, and I've seen it in some of my white friends. So I just wanted to know if you struggle with that in those moments.
Oh, Black, sorry, you muted yourself somehow.
In white people's intimate spaces, that only happened for me when I actually became a Christian, and it's and I think, and I thank God it only happened when I was a Christian, because then I came into your house with fresh eyes and just with the gospel governing my heart. So even if I would pick up anything that I think was slightly racist, I would try and filter it through that, because again, we all struggle from racism. But the question that I'm getting to is, did you have a similar experience where growing up you were never in Black people's intimate spaces, and post conversion, were you in Black people's private spaces? Have you been to a Black funeral, a Black wedding, Black party? And if so, how was it? If not, how's the gospel informing those relationships there?
Yeah, those are good questions, man. I think the first one, I personally, so I understand the struggle. I mean, I hate what white people have done. But at the same time, I think my understanding of God's providence is that He made me white, and so I don't struggle as much with being white, and I don't think there's something inherently evil about being white. I think white people certainly abused. Yeah. I mean, there's a whole history of what white people have done in this country that leaves very little to admire. And it's very hard to separate yourself from that. But like you, I don't think that it was a mistake that I'm white. And when I'm in those moments of deep discouragement about staying or going, it's more wrestling with on the one hand feeling like I'm not sure I can do anything positive in this space because I am just a reminder of all of that history, right? And sometimes I'm a perpetuator of that because I react with prejudice or racism. Or, supremacy is a subtle thing. Like sometimes you can't even see that you are operating under the assumption that my culture is superior. and my upbringing is superior, and everything about me is superior, you would never say that. You would never articulate it. It sneaks up on you. So, so I think to myself in those moments, what's the good of being here? And then I think again on God's providence, and I say, well, He's put me here, and I am here, and until it's very obvious otherwise, sometimes when I listen to Julius, I think it is obvious that I should go, but until my Black brothers and sisters in Christ are saying, listen, we need space, and I don't anticipate you guys ever saying that. It seems to me that it's part of the gospel working itself out, and God showing us His glory and showing us that even this terrible thing that has happened can be healed in community under the cross. And that's why I feel like I stay. So I guess my struggle, like you said earlier, it's all nuanced and everybody's experience is different. And I understand when white people are struggling with their identity, but I don't struggle with that so much as the doubt about whether being here is useful or helpful to anybody. That's mainly the nature of my struggle. The second one is I don't feel like I've been in enough Black spaces. It's been so much better since I became a Christian. But growing up, there was very little, Black people had to come into my space with my permission, kind of, that's how it worked. But since I became a Christian, it's gotten a lot better. And I've gotten to know Black people a lot better. We've had many, many, many Black families in our home. I think there's a hesitance to reciprocate, one, because I'm the pastor or whatever, and two, I think maybe there's some sort of cultural thing going on there. I don't know 100% why. We haven't had a lot of return invitations, is what I'm saying. But that's okay. It's not something that I worry too much about. I think we'll get there. At some point, Black people will feel comfortable to invite me into their home, and a few have. And it's been wonderful to go and break bread with Black people in their space, as a guest, right? So it's been so much richer since it's not anywhere near where it should be, but the gospel's made all the difference. And working shoulder to shoulder with Black people's made a massive difference, both in government and now in the church. And so, I just think the gospel has really, in this area, God has demonstrated His power for me, because I see a massive transition. I see a kind of a clear before and after, in terms of my desire to get to know Black people in their spaces and to get to know them for who they are. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it does, bro. And I think it does speak to. I don't think it's a coincidence that we both experienced some form of intimacy with each other's cultures when we became Christians. I think it just speaks to the power of what God is doing in the world. And I've obviously shared my opinions of how I think generally, and again, not all Black people, but generally how Black people view Black Christians. And so I think there's probably a number of times when I was speaking or where you were speaking, and my Black light bulb, if I should call it that, went off, because I'm like, here's a moment where I can be considered a sellout. I can be considered as somebody who got blinded by the white religion of the white God, and listen to how I'm sounding now. It's as though I'm abandoning my Blackness just for the sake of reconciliation, and we're gonna forget all the hurts, and we haven't said any of that, But I think in some of the language, people would assume that, and for me, the point that I'm making there is I'm super grateful that it's only when I understood the gospel, and clearly from your experience as well, that we could appreciate each other at a genuine level, and I think it's a real one and an eternal one. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said that everything on earth is not good. It's only good when it looks to Jesus. I'm paraphrasing. It's only good when it looks to Jesus, and it's only bad when it turns its back away from Jesus. You know? So for me, that statement just embodies just our experience.
Oh, bro, you muted again.
Somebody was calling me. Yeah. So my being in an intimate space, or your intimate spaces, became good because I looked to Jesus. You know, that experience was informed by Christ. And God in eternity considers that as a good thing. I didn't do it just so that I could say, hey, look at us, we've reconciled. But I think it genuinely comes from a transformed heart, and it's lived in light of eternity. If Jesus says that he gives us life and life abundant, I'm like, yeah, I can see that in our experiences and how we come together. So I think I'm super encouraged just by that, you know. And again, I said it to you, and I'll say it here publicly. If I'm considered a sellout, at least God doesn't, and that's what matters. That's the opinion that matters. You know, the picture and revelation of all people from all tribes, all languages coming together. If I'm gonna be considered a sellout for that, go ahead. Like I'd sell out that truth to that. It's not a dream. It's a reality, and we living it now before it's fully actualized. The other side of heaven, you know. So I'm like, hundreds. I'm more encouraged to stand side by your side and call you a brother genuinely, because we in an eternal family together, you know, and we share the same Father. And for me, that's more glorious than anything else, man.
I mean, just parting shot from me before you introduce the next episode, is just piggybacking off of that, because I think that is such a profound place to leave it, actually. But just to say, it's clear from my experience that the politics isn't enough, right? Yeah. So we can have all the right politics, but what you're describing is brotherhood at the level of being, not brotherhood at the level of ideology or political positioning. And it's a much more profound thing that we're talking about. And it was certainly my experience, because I had all the politics in the world, right? My politics was squared away. My father made sure of that, but it didn't stop the racism in my heart. Only Jesus could do that, and so that's what you're describing. So I say amen to that.
Sure. No, that's good, man. This was good, bro.
Very good.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, man. And for the church family, as you're watching this and just making sense of all of this, we do pray that you are encouraged. We do pray that there's a level of conversation that's going to start. If it hasn't, if it has, we hope that this furthers the conversation. I think, again, like Roydon said, we don't want to just wait for the media to dictate how we speak about any matter. In fact, the gospel compels us to always be speaking about all of life, because it affects all of life. So with that said, we're gonna end this episode. But next episode that we're gonna be doing, we're gonna just be speaking about how this particular thing that we're doing, the series, started, and obviously it was off the back of the unfortunate and very brutal death of George Floyd, and just the whole. I mean, it wasn't even a rise by then, but just how Black Lives Matter became a very big conversation. And so we wanted to just chat about that, and then speak about what that means for us at CCM, but also what it means for us as South Africans, Black, white, Asian, colored, Indian, what that actually means for us in this country. So hopefully you'll come around for that, and we'll continue the conversation together. Brother, do you want to pray for us?
Yeah, let me do that. Father, these have been two stories, and there's so many stories of your incredible grace to us. And we see in the particular details the beauty and the magnitude of your plan for all of history and for us here in South Africa. Sometimes it seems impossible that we're going to move forward together, but we know that in Christ, having heard these stories and knowing that they are two of many similar stories, we praise you, Father, that you've demonstrated once again that you intend to have a people for yourself, and you draw people from every tribe and tongue and people and nation. We're so grateful to you, Father. We're grateful for your work in our lives. We're grateful for your work in our church. Please use this face-to-face on race to do for the extension of your kingdom, Lord, to do this important gospel work, to work it into the soil of who we are as a family of believers. So we commit it all to you, and we ask that you use it for your glory. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
All right, bro.